Hello and welcome to lecture number 19 in our course Project Stakeholder Management. In this lecture we are going to continue where we left in the previous lecture, and that is talking about the attributes of the project stakeholders. Now in my last lecture I introduced different attributes like power, which I looked at in considerable detail. I also talked about the interests which stakeholders have in a project. I talked about concerns, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue with the attributes, and I'm going to be looking at the attributes of attitudes and behaviors in a project. That is, the attitudes and behaviors of the stakeholders in a project. Now these are basically having a lot to do with psychology. And if you have a good understanding or a background in psychology, then you will have some very good idea of what I'm trying to talk about over here with regards to attitudes and behaviors. Attitudes and behaviors are important because they affect the way a stakeholder is going to interact with the project. If a stakeholder, say, has a very positive attitude and very positive behavior towards the project, then that of course is good for the project. That is something which, as a project manager, as a project team member, as a project planner, implementer, one would like to encourage. On the other hand, if a stakeholder has a very negative attitude to a project, which translates also into a very negative behavior, there is a possibility that this could affect our project in a bad way. It could either affect the whole project, or it could affect parts of the project, or it could affect very specific functions of the project. But there could be some negative influence which is going to make it more difficult for us to successfully achieve our project. Coming to attitude now in some more detail. Attitude can be seen as the feeling of like, dislike, or indifference stakeholders exhibit towards a project or parts of the project. Now, attitudes are determined by many factors, and they can change over time. As I pointed out, attributes are not constant. The attributes of project stakeholders, they're dynamic, meaning they can change over time, even over short periods of time, possibly. Some stakeholders, their attributes may not change. There's also possible. Some may have their attributes changing, but over a longer period of time, and some may see changes over a relatively short period of time. Good stakeholder management and engagement strategies seek to influence attitudes in favor of the project. Attitudes are not normally cast in stone, and if you have, for example, a stakeholder who is not very favorably inclined towards your project, who doesn't like your project, who opposes it, it is possible sometimes to influence that stakeholder to change his, her, or its negative attitude towards your project, to make it more favorable. And good engagement strategies, they latch onto this. They see where there are possibilities for influencing behavior, for influencing attitude, and they seek to act thereupon. Now, what are the determinants of stakeholder attitudes? As I said, it's a psychological concept, and there are many factors, there are many determinants which influence your attitude, the development of your attitude, the manifestation of your attitude. When we're talking about attitude and behavior, also one thing I should mention here is that attitude is more inward looking. It's a sort of a feeling you have within you, whereas behavior is a more outward reaching. It is actually the actions which you take, the way you conduct yourself, the way you show yourself, the way you interact. That is behavior. It's more this action-oriented, interactional component, whereas attitude is more sort of a emotional, mental, inward component. Now, attitudes, they have got many determinants, and they are really at all different levels. For example, right at the top, if you look at this box over here, I have put in family, peers, community, society, nation. This is a very strong attitude shaping force, or forces rather here. The family in which you have grown up in which you come from, the attitudes which prevail within that family, which then mostly carry over into all the family members, and they adopt those kinds of attitudes. Your peers with whom you are interacting with in your age group, your colleagues, your community in which you are living, whether it's a small village, somewhere urban, or in some urban area, some town or locality, mohalla, whatever. The society, like the Pakistani society or the provincial societies, the Punjabi society or the Sindhi society or the Pashtun society, whatever. And of course at the national level, the national attitudes which form. So all these are forces which can shape your attitude. In most cases they would. Of course in some cases they may not. Other forces or determinants which can shape stakeholder attitudes are what I have given here in the second box. That is culture, traditions, religions, value systems. All this has a very big effect on your attitude, how you perceive the world, how you look at the world, how you look at reality around you, what you consider is right or what is not right, quote unquote. All these are factors also which shape attitudes. At the personal level, looking at you as an individual, for instance, you have your needs, and last week in the last class we talked about Maslow's pyramid of needs. Everyone has got needs, which of course shapes your attitude towards things, which affect how you access or how you achieve those needs. Everyone has got wants, everyone has got desires, everyone has got or should have goals as well as concerns. All this can shape attitudes. Then again at the individual level there are various aspects one has to take consideration of, like your knowledge level. You might be very knowledgeable, you might not be so knowledgeable, very intelligent, maybe not so intelligent, moderately intelligent. Plus the personal experiences you have made good experience, you have had bad experiences, good experience that can shape your attitudes favorably towards others or towards those with whom you have made good experiences, and vice versa with those you have made bad experiences. That will have a sort of a negative attitude, negative effect on your attitude building. Access to information and knowledge, of course. The more access to quality information you have, the more capable you are, or you should be, of forming your attitude towards something or someone, some person or some organization or some entity. The more information you have about that person or that entity or that someone, the more you can come to a more accurate sort of attitude from your particular perspective. Then of course there is a systemic level. You have your education systems. They can shape your attitudes, what you are exposed to, for example in school, what you are taught in school, what you are taught at college, or what you are taught at university. This can have an attitude shaping force. The administrative systems, political systems, legal systems, which all surround you, which you are sort of embedded in, all these can have attitude shaping consequences. And of course as well as the attitude shaping entity itself, which could be the project. You have the project, and this project is interfacing with you in different number of ways. It is affecting your environment. You can see the project. You can see what's all taking place. You're getting information from that project, for instance. You are processing all that information mentally, and then you are coming to an attitude. Well, my attitude towards this project is positive because all these factors are being met. It's good for me, it's good for my financial situation, it's good for my social situation, it's good for my community, etc., 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 etc. Or no, this project, I have a negative attitude towards it because it's causing a lot of, say, ecological damage, and it's not really going to contribute anything to me or to my community. It's only going to contribute to people who own it, who are funding it, and they will take away all the benefits, and we will have here all the disadvantages, and we're not going to get anything out of it. So that could be then a negative attitude shaping influence. So what you have here is it's a very large number of variables, you could say, and all these variables, they are interacting there in a very complex way with you as a stakeholder, and by processing all this information, by processing all these things which are given here, all these factors which are given here, somehow you develop your attitude, which may be positive, which may be negative, which depends on so many things. All these factors which I have given here, for different stakeholders, they will carry different weights. For some stakeholders, for instance, access to information and knowledge about a project will be the most important factors in shaping that stakeholder's attitude towards the project. For some other stakeholder, for instance, the culture, tradition, religion, value system may be the dominant shaping force, which shapes the stakeholder's attitude, and so forth, and so forth. So there is no sort of hard and fast rule that this and this is going to shape the attitude, but these are all just a collection of factors which normally would be expected to shape attitude. There may be more, some which I might not be aware of personally, but based on my research, based on my insights into the subject, these are what I consider to be the main attitude shaping determinants. And if you want to understand your stakeholders from the project perspective, then you have also got to look at all these determinants over here, and you have to try and assess them and see how they can influence your stakeholders. Now, we talked about attitude as something which is internal to the stakeholder, which builds up inside. Behavior, as I pointed out, is the outward manifestation, the way a stakeholder behaves, the way a stakeholder interacts or interfaces with a project. Usually behavior follows from attitude, but not always. It's a mistake to think that if you have a certain attitude towards a project, for instance, then the behavior automatically is going to follow on from the attitude. In most cases, yes, but not in all cases. Behavior, when we talk about behavior, it's important to note that there are different categories of behavior with regards to a project. Stakeholder can exhibit supportive behavior, that's in favor of the project. Stakeholder can exhibit adversarial behavior, that's against the project. And a stakeholder can exhibit indifferent behavior, that is neither for nor against the project. And within each of these categories, there are different intensities of supportiveness, of adversity, of indifference. And behavior, like the other stakeholder attributes, can change over time. You might have, say, a supportive attitude towards the project today. Tomorrow, meeting some days, some weeks, some months down the line, you might have a negative behavior. The same way, you can have a negative behavior towards the project today, and you can have a positive behavior tomorrow. Again, depending all on various factors, like I pointed out over here. For example, access to information. It's possible that one has access to the wrong information about the project, misinformation, and because of that one has formed a negative attitude, and this negative attitude is translated into a negative behavior. Boycotts, demonstrations, petition against, whatever. By correcting this misinformation as part of an engagement strategy by the project planners, by providing the correct information, in various ways of doing that, the negative behavior can be translated into positive behavior. Why? Because with the new information, which is correcting the previous misinformation, that can change the attitude of the stakeholder, and that in turn can change the behavior. Some stakeholders, yes, others might not. As I said, there's no hard and fast rule. Sometimes engagement strategies can be very successful. Other times, even the best engagement strategies, they might not be able to work. So, now when you talk about behavior, as I said, behavior mostly follows on from attitude. So there is this arrow here from attitude to behavior. Attitude determines behavior. Behavior follows on from attitude. There is consistency over here. Positive behavior, positive attitude translates into positive behavior. Negative attitude translates into negative behavior. Attitudes and behavior of project stakeholders are consistent. That is, the behavior reflects the attitude. There are also cases, relatively fewer in number, but they do exist, where attitude and behavior are inconsistent with each other. That means the behavior does not reflect the attitude. And various examples have been given in the psychology literature to demonstrate this, but we have got some of our own, which I have made up for you over here. Let us now look at this consistency as well as inconsistency of attitude and behavior by stakeholders. Let us take the first case, which assumes that attitude and behavior are consistent with each other. That is, attitude determines behavior. Behavior is a reflection of attitude. Well, one example could be, let us call it here, stakeholder X. Can be any stakeholder, can be individual, can be maybe an organization, can be an association, whatever. Any stakeholder, stakeholder X is passionate about preserving old colonial era buildings. Like you see in some of the older cities of Pakistan, in Lahore, and Multan, Peshawar, Karachi even, you see a lot of old colonial buildings from the British Raj era. Now, if attitude and behavior are consistent, well, if this is the attitude of stakeholder X is passionate, so that is, it's an attitude, it's a feeling, an emotion, passion, about preserving old colonial buildings, then in this case, the behavior of stakeholder X will be to oppose projects to construct commercial plazas in the old part of his, her, or its town. Why? Because when you're constructing some new commercial plazas, you need space. And in old parts of town, space is at a premium. So what you have to do is you have to knock down some other buildings, and often they'll be older buildings because it's an older part of town. So if the stakeholder is very keen or very passionate about preserving old colonial era buildings, and the stakeholder, consistent behavior and attitude, will oppose projects, maybe fiercely even, to construct commercial plazas in the old part of his town. Sounds logical. You like something, you like some building, you don't want it to be damaged, you don't want it to be torn down, you don't want something else to come in its place. So this is an example of behavioral consistency with attitude. The second example, let us say here stakeholder Y. Again, it can be any stakeholder, in this case a local government official. Let's say stakeholder Y is a local government official who desires to alleviate poverty in his or her district or town, locality, whatever. Now, this is the attitude of the stakeholder. This stakeholder desires to do something. It's a feeling, it's an emotion within that stakeholder, the attitude. Now, if attitude and behavior are consistent, then this stakeholder, for his behavior or her behavior, will support a project by a large foreign development implementing agency, for example, USAID or CEDA or DFID, something, to provide training to local youth in developing technical skills. Now, what is the relation between alleviating poverty and desire to alleviate poverty and supporting a project by a large development implementing agency to provide training to local youth in developing skills? Well, obviously, to alleviate poverty, you have to create some opportunities for people. And if you can train local youth to develop technical skills, that is opportunity to acquire skills, and by applying these skills, they can either find some jobs, which could be relatively well-paying, or they may even be able to set up their own business, self-entrepreneurship. So there is a clear consistency here between the desire to alleviate poverty, the attitude of this stakeholder who is a local government official, and the behavior of this local government official by supporting a project by a large foreign agency to provide training. And support can come in many ways. It can come in official ways, for example, by trying to expedite the process of granting permission and NOC, etc., etc. Can also be by, sort of lobbying, by trying to create support, by trying to create awareness how important it is for such projects to take place, so that the project can also be facilitated. So here you have got two examples where attitude and behavior are consistent with each other, which is in most cases the case. Then you have here some examples I've also made up where attitude and behavior are inconsistent with each other, and that's why I put this red cross over here, that behavior does not follow from attitude, which normally it should be doing. Now, what could be examples over here? What could be such cases? Well, I have brought two along also. Let us say here we have got stakeholder D. Again, can be anyone, can be a person, can be a group, an association, whatever. Stakeholder D strongly believes the rights of minorities must be respected. That's something good, which everyone should respect. Now, if this is the attitude of stakeholder D, who believes the rights of minorities must be respected, which is sort of inconsistent with human rights and a liberal attitude, then the behavior of stakeholder D should follow from that. In this case, it doesn't. Stakeholder D pickets the construction site of a planned counseling center for immigrants. Picket means to set up, sort of a post over there, to try and obstruct the work, in this case the construction work, which is taking place at a site. So there is a behavioral inconsistency here, because on the one hand, you are trying to provide a counseling center. There's a project trying to set up a counseling center for immigrants, which may be a lot of minorities. And you have a stakeholder who believes in the rights of minorities, but that same stakeholder is trying to obstruct the project to set up this counseling center for immigrants. What could be the reasons for that, for this behavioral inconsistency? One has to look a little bit closer. Maybe that stakeholder D is living very close to the area where this counseling center is going to take place. And while stakeholder D personally is in favor of granting rights to minorities and respecting their rights, this stakeholder does not want to have their counseling center located very close by, maybe because of all the hassle of having a construction site, or there may be other issues like maybe other minorities, immigrants might be settling in the area, and stakeholder D's property might decrease in value, or maybe there might be a higher crime rate. And stakeholder D might be a family man having small children who does not want to put at a greater risk by having minorities and immigrants in the neighborhood, assuming, of course, that such people are more prone to committing crime, which is not usually the case, but this might be a potential reason. So you see here this behavioral inconsistency with attitude. Then I have prepared here a second example. Stakeholder F, again, can be anyone, any organization, NGO, is a devoted environmentalist, supports the environment. Now, you would assume that if stakeholder F is a devoted environmentalist, then this stakeholder would do whatever it could to support projects which are good for the environment or which do not harm the environment. In this case, stakeholder F votes in a community referendum to support a large copper mining project in close proximity which has been proposed by a foreign company. Now this is, again, from an environmental perspective, such mining projects, they can have a lot of negative consequences. So if you look at it purely from an environmentalist perspective, you would expect stakeholder F to oppose, not to support, this mining project. However, the stakeholder is supporting it, not opposing it. Why is this the case? Well, one has to look a little bit closely. One has to think, one has to analyze, one has to observe. It's possible, for example, that stakeholder F thinks that this mining project will bring a lot of financial benefits to the community, which outweigh the environmental negative consequences. This is possible. Or there may be some other reasons behind that. It could be even that stakeholder F has got, let us say, a friend or a relation who is working at a high position in this project and then feels a loyalty to that friend or that relation, which overcomes the devotion to the environmentalist cause. So the point I'm trying to make here is that when you're looking at attitudes and behaviors, you have to take a more multi-dimensional sort of approach. You cannot look at it sort of in a unidimensional way. Person is an environmentalist, automatically that person will be against projects which damage the environment. In most cases, yes, but there will of course be some exceptions. There will be some cases where no is the actual approach which is used over here. So these are the things which you have to note about attitude and behavior. It's very multidimensional, very complex, and this is also where the complexity of our subject, project stakeholder management and engagement, comes from, because we are dealing with so many different stakeholders potentially. In many projects we have a large community of stakeholders, heterogeneous stakeholders, and all these stakeholders, they have their own processes for building attitudes. They have their own processes for building behaviors. And sometimes attitude and behavior may be consistent, sometimes it may not be consistent. And there's so many factors here which are interfacing and interacting, which are resulting then in attitudes and behaviors which themselves are not static, but which, as I pointed out, can change considerably even over short periods of time. This is a big challenge for stakeholder management and engagement. Big opportunity also. Now, when we are talking about attitude and behavior, let us look at specifically some of the key factors which determine how attitudes and behaviors form in stakeholders. There are many different factors, and you can also relate this to Maslow's pyramid of needs, which I had discussed in the previous lecture, because if you look at these factors and you look at the pyramid of needs, you will see there is very clear relationship over there. One factor which is very strong determining attitudes and behavior is the economic and financial gains and losses for the stakeholders. Now, there are so many things one has to look at over here. Gains and losses could be at an individual level, that is like for me, for you as a stakeholder, what we are personally going to gain, what we are going to lose as individuals. It could be at a neighborhood level, what is our neighborhood going to get, what is it going to lose, what is our community, that is an even broader level, what is it going to gain, what is it going to lose from the project. Or it could be at the organizational level. If you are looking at it from an organizational perspective as a stakeholder, what are the gains and losses? For example, a small business, a small vendor, for instance. So all these stakeholders, seen in relationship to a project, they may have economic and financial gains and losses. It's not necessary that all of them have got some gains or losses, but many of them will have economic, financial gains and losses. Gains, for instance, if a project is taking place in your neighborhood, you can provide inputs to the project. If you are a small business, and if you have got those selling those items which the project needs, this is an opportunity for you to do business. There is gain involved. Impact on society. Well, this is a very important determining factor. We talk about impact on society. We're talking about the social perspective over here. For example, the community and the neighborhood, the cohesion and spirit. How is this project going to affect the cohesion and spirit of togetherness of your neighborhood and community? Are you going to have a project which is going to divide the community into those who strongly oppose it and to those who strongly support it? That is not good for the community neighborhood cohesion, because then you have a split which is taking place through the middle into those who are for and to those who are against. So one has to see how stakeholders perceive such a potential split. You know, if they think that the project is going to create such a split in future, they might not look upon the project very favorably. But if they think that the project is actually going to promote community cohesion and spirit, then they would be expected to adopt a positive attitude and most likely a positive behavior towards that project. What about the cultural and religious perspective? You know, if, for example, you are trying to set up a casino or a gambling sort of place somewhere over here, many people might not look at it in a very favorable perspective because of cultural and religious reasons. That determines their attitude, which in turn, in most cases, would determine their behavior. And then, of course, there are national sensitivities and so forth with regards to certain projects or programs. Nuclear program in Pakistan, for instance, is considered nationally sensitive, and most people tend to support it. Then there is the determining factor, impact on health. How is the project going to impact on your health? Here we are talking usually about individuals, not organizations. How is the project going to affect your physical health? If you are at a project site where the whole day hammering is taking place, or demolition work is taking place, or construction work is taking place, for instance, how is it going to affect your physical and your psychological makeup? Will you, for example, be able to get enough sleep? Maybe before you had 8 hours of sleep, and now because of all the project going on and the traffic and the noise, you might be having only 5 or 6 hours of sleep. That has physical as well as psychological consequences and costs, as well as emotionally. Most very important for many stakeholders is the environmental dimension, the natural environmental dimension. How is the project going to affect on the physical or natural environment? Now, when we talk about the physical or natural environment, there are different levels we have to look at. For example, air. Air is part of the environment. Water, land, acoustics, you know, the sound, and aesthetics, that is the beauty. How is the project going to affect that? For example, if you take air, is there going to be a lot of dust in the air as a result of the project? Is there going to be a lot of pollution in the air when the project is finished and it goes into operation? For example, building a new chemical plant. How is it going to affect the water quality? How is it going to affect the soil? Are dangerous chemicals going to sort of go into the soil, and then maybe there go down into the water level? What about acoustically? Is there going to be a lot of noise as a result of this project during and after project completion? And aesthetics, or the beauty, if you are building if you have a very nice locality, very nice place, beautiful houses, beautiful landscapes, and then someone comes and says, I want to build a tall building which is mostly cement block, looking like a matchbox, or looking like a jailhouse. How is that going to affect the aesthetics of the locality in which the project is taking place? That is also a form of pollution. You could say it's visual pollution for the eye. Then there is impact on ecology, that is actually the natural environment. Biosystems, ecosystems, fauna, flora, that is the plants, the trees, the animals, can be any types of animals, can be birds, can be insects even, fish in river systems and water systems and lakes. So all this, one has to see how the project is going to determine, or how is it going to have an impact on the ecology, positive, negative, or no impact, and then how is this going to affect the stakeholders in terms of attitudes and behaviors. More factors I have given over here which determine attitude and behavior of stakeholders. Conservation, for instance. Conservation in the sense of preserving, conserving cultural assets like old buildings which have a cultural, historical value, historical heritage, archaeological. If you go here, especially in the northwest of Pakistan, a large number of very old archaeological sites from the Gandhara civilization going back to around 2,000 years. And when you go into the southern part of Pakistan, then there are a lot of sites from this Mohenjo-daro Harappa civilization dating back 4,000 or 5,000 years, spread all over the place. Well, how are projects going to affect these sites? Are they going to be damaged? For instance, if you want to construct a road, or if you want to construct a pipeline, or if you want to construct a dam nearby, this could determine people's or stakeholders' attitude and behavior towards the project. Then there is a political dimension, the personal ideology of people, the local, regional, national outlook. You might oppose a project, or a stakeholder might oppose a project because it is being done by a person or a party against whom that stakeholder is opposed. For example, you know, if you have a ruling party and you have an opposition party, and then the ruling party wants to do some projects, and the people who support the opposition, they oppose those projects, not necessarily because they think the projects are bad, but because they think that the ruling party is not good, and vice versa, of course. And then you have many different political parties, you have many different ideologies, and this can play a role in determining the stakeholders' attitude and behavior. They might not trust projects and programs which are being planned and executed by some other party or by some group which represents another ideology. Attitudes to change is also a key determining factor. You know that it's very difficult to change. It's very difficult to bring about change. You have a lot of stakeholders, you have a lot of people who oppose change because they don't know what it brings for the future. There is a question mark, uncertainty. Is this change going to be for the better? How much is it going to cost in terms of time, in terms of effort, energy, as well as monetary cost, and so forth. So attitudes to change, not always very positive. In many cases they are negative. In some cases they are also positive, depending on the initial situation or the initial circumstances. Of course, there are many factors which people or stakeholders look at. How is the project going to affect their lifestyle? How is it going to affect opportunities for personal and organizational development? If you feel that as a result of a change project, well, all projects are basically about bringing change, but if you have a project which is specifically aimed at restructuring an organization, for instance, you would ask yourself as a stakeholder, well, what's in it for me? How am I going to benefit from this project? Is it going to make my life easier, or is it going to make my life more difficult? And so forth, and so forth, and so forth. So these are the things one would ask oneself as a stakeholder. And if one thinks that the benefits are going to be less than the costs of change, then a stakeholder would probably oppose that project. On the other hand, if a stakeholder can be convinced that the change is going to bring out big benefits, far outweighing the costs, then that stakeholder can be brought around to supporting that project. Keep in mind that the benefits are uncertain, but the costs are quite certain. You know, you will have to spend so much extra time on work, or you might not be getting any pay raise in order to save money to finance the project, and so forth and so forth. So there are specific, tangible, measurable costs involved for uncertain returns. So there is also this certainty versus uncertainty element. But with a good engagement strategy here, you could convince people to support the change. Another factor which determines attitude and behavior of stakeholders with regards to a project is the security dimension. How is the security of individuals going to be affected by the project? Is it going to be endangered? For example, if you are setting up a major facility, military facility, very close by, and there's a good chance that it's going to be attacked by terrorists or saboteurs. And if it is attacked, then the consequences will not only be restricted to that particular base, but they will go over a wider area. So how is individual security affected by a project? How is group security affected? How is organizational security affected by a project? In some cases, one has to ask oneself. The same way, when a project is being undertaken, if it's a large project, there might be a large influx of people coming in to work on that project from outside. And some of these people might also be criminals, you know, and they might be doing mischief in the neighborhood where they are also working on the project. So there might be concerns because of that, which could result in a negative attitude and behavior towards a project, especially if such instances do occur, and they have occurred on occasions. Then there is the reputation of the project owners and developers. Do they have a good reputation? Do they have a bad reputation? There's some companies, for example, which have got very bad reputation, mining companies, some of them, some oil companies also. The Shell oil company, for instance, although they have spent a lot of resources on trying to look good from an environmental perspective, that they are also doing things for the environment, somehow stakeholders always tend to have a very negative impression of them because of bad experience in the past. So the past experience has carried over into the present and possibly will carry over into the future. So already the reputation of the owners, even if it is maybe undeserved at the moment, that can be a negative factor in terms of determining attitude and behavior towards that project. So as you have seen, there are quite a large number of factors over here which can decide whether a stakeholder forms a positive or a negative attitude towards the project, and we'll come to that in the next class again. What I want to do now is I just want to show you this illustration which I have prepared for you over here, and that is meant to show you attitude and behavior patterns which exist among stakeholders. Now here, this box on the extreme left of your screen, that represents the stakeholder community, the entire stakeholder community. And here I am focusing to a large extent on the secondary or external stakeholders, but the same also applies to the internal stakeholders. Internal stakeholders you would expect to be more concentrated over here in this part. Supportive stakeholders, because they have a legal obligation, contractual obligation towards the project. They are getting benefits through their participation or their involvement in the project. You would expect to find them all, or most if not all, over here in this area. Then you have got other stakeholders who are indifferent. That means they are neither for nor against your project. They have really no opinion. They have not really even given much thought to it. They're not taking much interest, even though they are stakeholders and they will be affected by it. But they basically are not focused on the project. They are more concerned with other things, their own affairs or whatever they're doing. That takes precedence for them over here. Then you have another category of stakeholders over here, where you have the adversarial stakeholders. That's why I painted it in red. Red means you have to watch out. Green means yes, okay, you are getting support, or you can go through. And with each of these three basic categories of stakeholders, whether they are supportive, whether they are indifferent, or whether they are adversarial, specifically with regards to supportive stakeholders and adversarial stakeholders, you have subcategories. You have some stakeholders who are strongly supportive of your project. You have some stakeholders who are moderately supportive of your project. And you have got some who are just marginally supportive of your project. So just because you are supportive doesn't mean that you are all strongly supportive or even moderately supportive. There are different intensities of supportiveness. And even here within these subcategories of supportiveness, you can build further subcategories. Those who are strongly supportive, or strongly supportive, or just strongly supportive, etc. And the same with all the other ones over here. Now this is really the attitude dimension here. These categories and this intensity of supportiveness or adversity. The behavioral dimension kicks in over here. Among supportive stakeholders, you have got some who are active and who are passive. Passive means you support the project, you like the project, but you're not doing anything for it. You're not going out of your way to support it. You're not doing anything specific to facilitate the project, but you like it. Active are those who try to facilitate the project through actions. And there are many different types of ways one can do that. And you might have strongly supportive stakeholders who are active. You might have moderately supportive. You might even have marginally supportive. Usually the more strongly supportive you are of the project, the more active you will tend to be. But that doesn't mean that if you are marginally or moderately supportive, you don't do anything. You also may be doing things. And that's why I've also put arrows over here. At the same time, you may be strongly supportive, but you might also be passive. Yes, I'm really in favor of something, but I'm sorry, I can't do anything. I'm so busy, I've got so many other things, I've got so many things to do. I just cannot take the time, I cannot take the energy to do something specifically for this project. This kind of stakeholders also you may be having. So here you have the supportive stakeholders in different intensities of supportiveness, and active or passive. And then you have here the adversarial stakeholders, and the same logic applies. You might have some who are strongly opposed to your project, some who are moderately opposed to your project, and some who are just marginally opposed to your project. And again, among the strongly opposed to your project, you might have some who are very active, who are very dangerous stakeholders, by the way, because they are strongly against your project, and they will look at whatever means they can to try and create problems for your project. You might have some moderately and marginally who are active, and you might also have some who are passive, very much opposed to your project, for instance, but not going out of the way to do anything against it. The same way like some who are strongly supportive are not going out of their way to do anything for it. So we also have to look at what determines adversity and supportiveness. We have looked at some attitude, behavior determining factors. What we can say is that the higher the perception of net gain by the stakeholders, the more the stakeholders think they're going to benefit from a project, net benefit from a project, the more supportive they are going to be. So that is why I have drawn this green arrow pointing upwards. Means that the more perception of net gain, here in the positive, the more supportive they are going to be. And the less they think they are going to benefit from the project, the more adversarial or indifferent they are going to be. The same way, on the other side of the coin, if you look over here, perception of net loss, the more the stakeholders think they are going to lose from the project going down, the more they're going to oppose the project. The less they think they lose, the more they are going to be indifferent or supportive of the project. So this is really, in a nutshell over here, it sums up really the factors of how stakeholders are in terms of attitude, what intensity of attitude they have got, what category of attitude they have got, behavior also, and the determining factor of net gain and net loss. The more the stakeholder perceives a net gain, the higher the perceived net gain, higher the support. The higher the perception of net loss, the higher the opposition to a project. It's a very simple logic, assuming that the stakeholder behaves rationally. Now, I've also prepared this slide over here just to show you again the whole system. You have here a project, maybe building a new roller coaster or a theme park, which is composed of different phases. The pre-project phase, when you are conceiving the idea, when you're collecting information, when you're doing a pre-feasibility or a feasibility, etc. The project phase, when you're actually doing the project, planning, executing the project, and the post-project phase, when this roller coaster and theme park go into operation, and then they're going on for years and years and years. All these projects, in this case this project, this just symbolizes all projects. They have the change impact, many dimensions which we have looked at, and this is where stakeholder engagement comes in. And you have to look at the level of interest, you have to look at their concerns, also their motivations, you have to look at their attitude, behavior, their power, their influence, as well as their expectations and perceptions. This is not something which I have looked at separately, but stakeholders have got expectations on projects. Let us say, for example, the stakeholders expect that this project is going to create 50 jobs for people living in the community. That could be an expectation, and the target could be, expectation target could be 50. And then when the project kicks off, one finds out that actually the project has created 80 jobs. Instead of 50, it has created 80, meaning 30 more. That means that the expectations have been surpassed. They have been better than, the result has been better than expected, which also can increase the positive image of the project and translate into more support, attitude and behavior for the project. On the other hand, if the expectation was 50 and the actual number of jobs created was 20, it's much less than expected. Well, that can then create a sort of a unfavorable image of the project. It has not lived up to its expectations, and people or stakeholders are no longer that supportive of the project. They had this expectation, then they saw that the expectation was not met. Their perception of the project, their feeling or idea of the project has sort of come down. They have got a more negative perception. On the other hand, they can have a positive perception if, for example, the number of jobs is much more than expected, is much more than thought. Rational behavior, I mentioned the term rational behavior. What we mean here is that a stakeholder behaves in a manner which is consistent with his, her, or its interests. If I see that I'm going to benefit a lot from this project, financially, socially, culturally, etc., then if I'm behaving rationally, then I would support the project. If I'm not behaving rationally, then I might oppose the project, even if I'm benefiting a lot from it, which would be strange. Why would I oppose something from which I'm going to benefit a lot? It would not be in my interest to oppose it, but there are some stakeholders, for whom rational behavior does not come into play. They might oppose a project even if they stand to gain from it, even if they stand to knowingly gain from it, they might oppose the project. These will be relatively few in number, but they will be there. And of course these are a problem for the project because no amount of engagement might be able to influence such stakeholders. There is of course also the informational aspect. When you are trying to decipher what is going to be the impact of a project on you, economically, financially, socially, security-wise, etc., you need to have information. And it's not always possible that to easily get this information. You might have to go out and look for it. Where do you look for it? You might get it from some other stakeholder who is opposed to the project and who is giving you a very one-sided informational view of the project, which makes you then negatively inclined towards the project. So this is where, from the project perspective, engagement strategy has a very strong, or should have a very strong, informational component. You have to provide information to your stakeholders in a way which is ethically and legally sound. You know, you cannot provide, or you should not provide, wrong information to them. You should not tell them that all of them are going to benefit hugely from the project when you know that that's not the case, when they're actually all going to suffer a lot as a result of the project. But if you know that your project has got many strengths, and that is why you also conduct a SWOT analysis from the project to identify those strengths, then you try to communicate them to your stakeholders. You tell your stakeholders, look, all these are what you are going to get as a result of our project. Stakeholders might not know that. It's up to you from the project perspective to communicate that to them. It's your responsibility. A good management and engagement strategy will communicate that. And so forth. Coming here again to expectations and perceptions. Expectations, what outcomes will the project bring? I expect. It is futuristic. You're looking into the future. What will the project bring during and after completion? Perceptions, what outcomes is the project bringing? Now this is based on observation. Something here, expectations, is what you think will be in future, a state which you think will be existing in future, or a condition. And the perceptions here is what you are actually observing. So, and you are processing all this, these perceptions, these information in relation to your expectations, and that can determine a lot your attitude towards the project. If you have very high expectations of a project, but your perceptions, you can see that the project is not living up to your expectations, well, that is going to give a negative attitude towards the project. Especially over time, when the project is consistently not living up to its expectations. It could be that the project might not live up to its expectations in the short term, but is more than living up in the medium to longer term. So that also has to be kept in mind. But if you have a project where you have high expectations and constantly you are seeing that your expectations are not being met, much less, then that is going to create a very negative impression of the project. Now, just let us look at this example over here. Two images I have brought. One is a nuclear power station, one is a theme park, Disney World. The intensity of stakeholder supportiveness, indifference or adversity towards a project is determined primarily by the nature of the project and the perceptions which the stakeholders develop about it based on the information they have and possibly their previous experience with similar projects. You can see that there are quite a number of different components over here. Nature of the project, the perceptions of the project, the information, the expectation, plus of course the experience on similar projects in the past and how much they remember that experience, whether it was positive or negative. A project to develop a Walt Disney theme park near a township would probably generate more support among stakeholders than a project for construction of a nuclear power station because of the stigma which is attached to the nuclear power industry. In many cases, but not always, stakeholders are very different in their attitudes and their behaviors. You might find some stakeholders which are strongly opposed to nuclear power stations because of the information they get, higher incidence of cancer, leukemia, possibility of terrorist attack, previous experience with nuclear disasters, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, etc., and so forth. Stakeholders tend to generate a negative image of the nuclear industry, while they may have a very positive impression of theme parks. Theme parks are good. You know, you take the family there, you take the children there, you can enjoy yourself, lots to see, lots to experience. On the other hand, if you are living in a locality where for a long time you have no electricity, well, Pakistan for instance, you know, where there's a big shortfall of electricity and it's getting worse and worse every year, and people are sometimes 12, 15, 16 hours a day without electricity, then you might find that the stakeholders here would tend to favor such projects which in most other places of the world they might tend to abhor or tend to disfavor. So you always have to see stakeholder perceptions and stakeholder attitudes, behaviors in a relative context. Because most stakeholders in one place oppose a project doesn't mean that they will in another place. In another place, most of them might support that same project. The concept of rational behavior over here, as I pointed out, project stakeholders who behave rationally will try to maximize their quality of life. Maximizing their quality of life, how do you do that? Is the stakeholders' perceived gain from the project greater than, equal to, or less than its perceived loss from the project? To maximize your quality of life, you will try to have maximum gain. Of course, that is rationally, that's logical. And the stakeholders will be identifying the projects, they'll be looking at the projects, they'll be analyzing the projects from their perspective, based on information they have, etc., etc. Well, if the project gain is greater than the project loss, then when the perceived gain from the project, that is improvement in the stakeholder quality of life, is greater than the perceived loss from the project, loss is reduction in the stakeholder quality of life, stakeholders will support the project. When the perceived gain is greater than the perceived loss, stakeholders will support the project. That's only if they are behaving rationally, as I said. If they behave irrationally, they may oppose the project, even though they are gaining more and they are losing from it. But rational stakeholder will always support the project if the perceived gain is greater than the perceived loss. And perception depends on, as I said, many factors. It depends on information, it depends on observation, and so forth. Now, if the project gain is equal to the project loss, when the perceived gain for the stakeholders from the project is equal to the perceived loss from the project, stakeholders will be indifferent. It means whatever they gain in one way, they lose in another way. So the net gain is zero. There is no net gain. The net perceived gain is equivalent to the perceived loss. So why should a stakeholder support or oppose a project? They have neither for nor against. They have nothing from it, they lose nothing from it. They gain nothing, they lose nothing. So they would be indifferent, a rational stakeholder. And then over here, if the project gain is less than the project loss, when the perceived gain from the project is less than the perceived loss from the project, meaning stakeholders are losing more than they are gaining, there's a net loss, stakeholders who are rational will oppose the project. Why? Because they are losing more than they are gaining. Why should they support something which is causing them a loss, a net loss? That doesn't make sense. It's not rational. You will oppose something where you're going to lose. For example, depreciation in property value. If you feel that the project will result in a depreciation of a property value and no benefits for you, well, then that's a loss for you. Especially if the property is your main asset, then there could be a big drop in your wealth. So you would logically, rationally tend to oppose that project. On the other hand, if you think that the project is going to bring about a big appreciation in your property value, it's going to double in price over 2 years, let us say, well, that is a big incentive for you. You will support that project because it's an opportunity for you to increase your property value. So you have got these different categories here, net gain, net loss, neither gain nor loss, and the stakeholders will support, oppose, or neither support nor oppose the project based on their perceptions of gain and loss from that project. So what we are going to do now in the next class, because we are at the end of today's class, what we are going to do is we will be looking at, in a little bit more detail, at some of the reasons why stakeholders support and oppose projects. I have already sort of given you the broad framework why they support and oppose projects, but we will look at it a little bit more specifically. What we have done in this lecture today is we had continued looking at the different attributes of stakeholders, focusing on their attitudes and their behaviors, as well as the concept of rational behavior in project stakeholder management. As you can see, these attributes, they are quite complex because of their dynamism and because of the very large number of factors, determinants, which determine actually, or which result in the formation of attitude, or in the development of attitude and the corresponding behavior, whether it is consistent or seemingly inconsistent with the attitude. So that's it for today, and see you in the next class. Thank you very much. Bye.